friends, and welcome to another episode of Chapters on Armstrong Neighborhood Television channel. Chapters is a show where I get the chance to interact with and talk to authors, editors, publishers, and since we're on Zoom, I can do it from all over the country, which is a wonderful thing. I'm your host, Carter Seaton, and we're delighted to have you with us today. And our guest is a really special man. His name is Eyre. He is a Pulitzer Prize winning author. He won this Pulitzer for investigative reporting when he worked at the Charleston Gazette. And he has written a book called Death in Mud Lick. He also has many other awards, some of which were for stories that he'd written that were in various investigative journals, I suppose. He graduated from Loyola in New Orleans and got his master's from the University of South Florida. He worked at the Charleston Gazette for a number of years, and now he is part and parcel and founder of Mountain State Spotlight. So we're going to ask him about that too. He lives in Charleston with his wife and his two cats. And I saw one of them on the back of the couch there a minute ago.
That was Blackie Bella, yes.
And we're happy to have you with us today, Eric. Thank you so much for joining us. Since I didn't mention the subtitle of the book, Death in Mud Lick, tell us a little bit about why it's named that.
Well, it's funny. One of the hardest things working with the publisher was coming up with the title and the subtitle. We probably went back, the subtitle is A Coal Country Fight Against the Drug Companies That Delivered the Opioid Epidemic. And the word delivered is because it's about opioid distributors. It doesn't focus so much on the manufacturers like Purdue Pharma, but this book actually focuses on the distributors who are the companies that send the pain pills from, or take them from the factories and deliver them to pharmacies and hospitals. But we went around and round. On the subtitle, because you had to have keywords and stuff. Scribner was the publisher, and for search purposes, the word opioid had to be in there, and so it was just we spent probably more time on that than anything. Then the title was also kind of up for grabs, Death in Mud Lick. Originally, when I signed the book contract, it was supposed to be Sustained Outrage, which is one of the slogans of the former Gazette publisher, the late Mr. Chilton, Ned Chilton had come up with that, and it means kind of keeping on top of stories and hammering away at stories until justices are righted. So I was a little unsure of the title, Death in Mud Lick. I thought it was almost like naming your book, like that town in, I always said if somebody wrote a book about that town, and I think it's in Logan or Lincoln County, Big Ugly, Lincoln County, I believe. Lincoln. And so Death in Mud Lick was the title of the first chapter. They liked that. I did a survey of, about probably 8 or 9 people in West Virginia, and then 8 or 9 outside, and almost to a person, the people in West Virginia did not like Death in Mud Lick, but the people outside in New York and Seattle, they really liked that title. So I went with it. I'm happy with the title. It is somewhat mysterious, and now that it's kind of being recognized sort of as a true crime book, it does fit for that. Yes. Yeah, that's the story. And they wanted to get the word coal. The publishers in New York wanted to get the word coal in there too. So we got it all.
Yeah. So how did this story begin?
It starts with the death of a coal miner named Bull Priest, who was in 2005, who overdosed on OxyContin, and his sister, Debbie Priest. She said from that day forward, she wasn't going to let her, she's seeing this is sort of the beginnings of the opioid epidemic, and neighbors and friends are dying all around her. And she's like, she came to the conclusion that she's not going to let him become just another statistic in the overdose death toll, that, she wants to, in some ways, avenge his death or to hold others responsible. The drug companies, initially it was she filed suit then against the pharmacies, and she's quite a character. She's sort of this Aaron Brockovich type character. Uh, she really did a lot of work on this. After they settled the lawsuit over her brother's wrongful death lawsuit, then she rounded up a good almost 30 people that had similar situations with losing their loved ones to overdose, and that's just started a chain reaction that kind of you know went up the ladder. You have the patient and the person with substance abuse disorder at the bottom, and then you go to there's the doctors prescribing, and then the pharmacist dispensing, and then the distributors shipping, and they all kind of, and the manufacturers, they all kind of work together, and it's all about, of course, making money, and a lot of money, billions and billions of dollars.
How did you get involved in this?
I came into this in a really strange way, Carter. I worked down at the State House at the the press room at the Capitol Bureau. So I was in charge of like or I covered the legislature, I covered state agencies, and covered state government corruption. And I got some tips. Actually, there were two or three people that called that we had an attorney general's race. There's former attorney general uh, Warren McGraw, who'd been around for 20 some years, 5 terms. And then this new guy, his name was Patrick Morrissey. He grew up in, uh, last we had seen, he had worked on Capitol Hill, and he was a New Jersey native, and he got his law license 6 days before he ran for Attorney General in West Virginia. And lo and behold, I mean, nobody took him seriously. And frankly, I dropped the ball as a reporter during the campaign. Everybody thought this was a runaway for Dow McGraw. That this guy from New Jersey who ran when Morrissey ran for office in New Jersey for a congressional seat, he finished dead last out of 7 people. But then he bought a home in Harper's Ferry, like a summer home in Harper's Ferry, and he got state residency and voted in West Virginia. But I get this tip that he had a big inaugural party. And first off, inaugural parties are kind of strange for an attorney general to have an inaugural party. The governor has one. And so they said, well, look who donated to the inaugural party. So I got the list, and I'm going down the list, and it says West Virginia Coal Association, okay, check. Oil and gas, check. Grocers Association, check. And then it says Cardinal Health, and I didn't even know what Cardinal Health was. And then it was explained to me that it's one of the largest drug distributors in the nation. And oh, by the way, there's a lawsuit that was filed by McGraw before he left office back in June of the year, that's sort of in 2012. So he filed a lawsuit, and so Patrick Morrissey, the new attorney general that won the race, a Republican, first Republican we had in 30 since 1933, to hold the attorney general's office. And so I'm looking down, I'm starting to look into Cardinal Health. I see that executives from Cardinal Health had donated to his campaign. And then I find out that his wife is the lead lobbyist for Cardinal Health in Washington, D.C. So you have him supervising a lawsuit against Cardinal Health while she's working for Cardinal Health. And there was a bunch of other distributors as well, but the Cardinal Health was actually filed separately. So, and from day one, he said that he had nothing to do with the Cardinal case. He's completely hands off. We asked for any documentation that would show that he recused himself or stepped aside from the case, and there was none. And then they emailed me and said there was an oral recusal, and I didn't know what that was, or verbal recusal. But he just told somebody he was recused from the case. Well, we would later find out through uh, Freedom of Information Act requests and actually some leaked documents showed that he actually indeed had been involved in the case, and was actually calling the shots for many months.
Wow. How long did it take you to parse out all the different tentacles of this crisis? And do all the investigative reporting it took to get back to what was actually happening.
Yeah, I actually from that day forward, I was following the Morrissey case, but I wanted to look at other things, like for instance, these pain clinics. When I started back in looking into this in 2013, there was like 55 called pain management clinics, and these were real shady rogue operations. They were spread mostly in southern West Virginia, but there were some in the Eastern Panhandle, and of course there were some in Huntington. And basically, it was a place that you could go and pay 150 bucks and get a prescription for either hydrocodone or OxyContin. Um, and there was no for a while, it was like the Wild West. There was no supervision. So around that time, the state DHHR, Department of Health and Human Resources, decided to make it that these, or there was a law passed also that these pain clinics would be subject to inspections. And then you'd think, okay, that the pain clinic would just shut down and go away. No, they just kept doing what they were doing. The DHHR inspectors went in and they came out with these giant reports about things like people carrying guns in the waiting room, that they had former cops, former state police officers, minding the store at the clinic, but also the police officers were the former cops, the retired cops were also taking temperatures and blood pressure of the people that were waiting in line. And then they had these special machines that had pre-signed, so like a stamped signature for a prescription, that they just had these machines that were spitting them out, one every couple seconds, and they were, handing them out like candy, and they all had relationships with particular pharmacies, usually independent pharmacies. So that was a big part. I wanted to learn sort of all facets, and I wrote about that. I wrote about doctors being disciplined for trading prescriptions for things like sex and money and drugs and all the rest of it. So I thought that I really wanted to school myself on all the different facets of the opioid crisis, and that's what I set out to do, and that's what I did.
Where is Mud Lick?
Mud Lick is about 40 or 50 people, and it's just up the road from Kermit. Um, I think I think Crum is also real close by. Um, there's not much there. Backstory on Mud Lick is I thought it was one word, and I've got a map that shows that there's a Mud Lick um, uh, road, and it has it as one word. So finally, I called the 911 center in Wayne. It's in Wayne County because the Kermit's right on the border of Wayne and Mingo. And I said, "Ma'am, how do you spell this? How is this spelled?" I mean, I had other people swearing that Mudlick was two words. Some were one. She said, "Honey, it's two words." She said, "But don't you worry about it because there's 50 people that live there, and most all of them don't even have phones. So you're not going to hear any complaints." But it was just the place. It's the place where Bull Priest, Debbie Priest's brother, he overdosed in the trailer in Mudlick. I've only been there once. It's way back in the woods, and the lick, which is another word for a creek, just kind of runs through by. But it's
Give us
interesting
this.
area.
Give us the statistic that you found about how many drugs were being shipped into Kermit. I think
The
that's
one that really blew me away was, yeah, the Say Right Pharmacy, the only pharmacy. It was under nearly 9 million, but under 9 million hydrocodone pills alone. There was additional OxyContin that was sold out of that, not nearly as many, but over 2 years. At one point, it was one of the highest selling drugstores for hydrocodone in the nation. In tiny Kermit, which has a population of what, like 380, 400 people. I mean, they couldn't possibly be using all those drugs, but they were just, everybody was converging on Kermit to buy prescription opioids. It was the go-to place.
what were your biggest hurdles in trying to get to the bottom of this?
Well, um, the the court, the lawsuit that had been filed by McGraw that Morrissey inherited, at one point they reached the secrecy deal that nothing would be distributed to nothing would be available to the public and it would be mostly under seal. And I never heard of that. I mean, the allegations in the lawsuit that was filed, Jim Cagle was the lawyer, but he was working for the state. And even the complaint, the initial complaint that talks about what, the reasons for the lawsuit, that was filed under seal. So we had to go to court. Fortunate enough to have a WVU professor, Pat McGinley, his wife, Suzanne Weiss, and a local lawyer down there, Tim Conaway, in Boone County, where the suit was filed. And we had to intervene and make a motion to unseal all these records. And so that was a big hurdle. When I walked into Judge Thompson's courtroom in Boone County, there was an army of corporate lawyers from New York, from Washington D.C., and that's when I first realized that this is a big deal. Washington D.C., Pittsburgh, Columbus, and they were all there to try to keep these records secret. And then the judge indicated that he was going to unseal the records, and they said, okay, well, you can unseal them, but we're going to black certain words out or redact certain words. And we actually we fought that, and the judge agreed to unseal everything. But it turned out the blacked out words weren't words; they were actually numbers of pain pills. They didn't want anybody to see these numbers of pain pills. I mean, we were fortunate to have a judge in Boone County that really understood this problem. He was very fair to the corporations and the newspaper. They accused us of having the companies accused the newspaper of having an intrusive journalistic nose, which I thought was funny. The newsroom brass said we should make T-shirts that say "intrusive journalistic nose." But we did get the records, and that led us to amid those records, not only the numbers, but there was statements in there that said the DEA data showed, and I had to find out where this DEA data had come from, and it had come from upstairs from where I was sitting in the Capitol, and Morrissey had these spreadsheets of every single pharmacy, every county in West Virginia, and the names of the distributors and how many pain pills were distributed everywhere. And it was just horrible. I mean, across the state. The story I wrote was 780 million hydrocodone and oxycodone alone. And this is all under the backdrop of West Virginia leading the nation in overdose deaths. You had I got a list once of like the top 20 counties in the nation for percent per capita basis of overdose deaths, and like 8 or 9 of them, all within the top 12, were in West Virginia. Then Kentucky, all the Eastern Kentucky had a lot of them. And then there was one, ironically, it was a coal county in Utah, was like number 12. So yeah, that was the beginnings, and we had a long, tough court battle, but in the end, we won.
Did you ever feel threatened yourself personally?
Not like physically threatened. I know when we got those leaked emails from Morrissey's office, his deputy wrote a letter saying that we were gonna face sanctions if we printed anything related to the email, because we had gone to court prior to that and lost. We actually lost with a Kanawha County judge who said that Morrissey could keep these emails secret. And so when we finally got them leaked to us, somebody put them actually on my front porch, in the mailbox on the front porch, and my son had to call me to tell me what was there. I don't know how they found my house, and I still to this day don't know who leaked them. Yeah, so when that happened, the chief deputy for Morrissey called our lawyer and said, the newspaper's going to face sanctions. If you print this stuff, you're violating a judge's order. But there's, the case, the Pentagon Papers case out of the New York Times and Washington Post, you can't do that prior restraint. And our lawyer, Pat McGinley, let them know that. And then in retaliation for writing that story, Morrissey launched an antitrust investigation against the Gazette, and when we were merging with the Daily Mail at the time.
Yeah.
And as part of that, he asked for all financial, all employee records, discipline records. I mean, I don't know what he was trying to get at, but it was eventually all thrown out of court. But he had an investigation going. He filed a subpoena with the paper.
But clearly that was retaliatory for what you were doing.
Yeah.
Yeah. Knowing that the lawsuits with the drug manufacturers are still ongoing, particularly with various cities in the state and so forth.
Right.
Do you plan to write some sort of a sequel after this is all over?
Oh, not really. These things have been dragging on because of COVID. This would have all been over a year ago if we didn't have COVID, but um, they, the latest is the sequel or is that the right word, or is it the epilogue to the epilogue? Because I have an epilogue. I don't know what the word is for that. The latest we've heard is that the companies are offering nationwide, because eventually we in the Washington Post got the statistics for the whole nation, and it's just 100 billion pills for the entire nation over a 7 or 8 year period. But that has supposedly tentatively been settled, but nothing's been filed. $26 billion. Purdue went bankrupt, so they're not going to be able to get much off of them. They got 10 million off of West Virginia, got 10 million off the McKinsey is a consulting firm that was helping Purdue Pharma turbocharge their sales, and they just settled with that last week. And you still have this ongoing case. You probably know Paul Farrell in Huntington. And Paul said he looked at the national settlement, which was, this 26 billion, and he said he looked at what West Virginia was going to get and what Cabell County was going to get, and he said, no way, it wasn't enough. I think statewide, I think we're supposed to get 200 million. I don't know what the Cabell County was, but he said it's not enough. I mean, this has just impacted. It really has impacted Huntington and Cabell County more than anywhere in the state. Even though I write about small Lincoln County, I mean, Cabell County bore the brunt. I mean, remember the 26 overdoses in 24 hours? And, I mean, it was just a real mess. Thank God you had people like the fire chief, Jan Rader, trying, and they've turned the corner. They've done incredible work in Huntington, helping people get back on their feet and into recovery programs. But yeah.
Good. Okay, let me ask you a second question about that. Did you plan when you started into this to just do it as an investigative series of articles for the Gazette, or did you think in the back of your mind that it might be a book someday? Or did that happen after you got a Pulitzer?
Just for the newspaper. I didn't know. I didn't know anything about writing a book. So people say, well, why did you write a book? And I say, well, first off, after you win the Pulitzer, you get all these emails from these publishers and agents in particular, as you probably know. I think that's because you got plenty of time. It took me, when did I start? In 1998. Well, it took, as a reporter, 30 plus years for me to win a Pulitzer. And not all my stories were home runs. A lot of them were singles, bunts, even a few clunkers.
Yeah, so you got calls from publishers saying we'd like to do it.
Yeah, and then I had heard there was people that were talking about doing a movie and other people doing the same book. So I said, I just better get on the stick and do a book. And I actually called, I didn't call any of the agents that emailed me. I had an agent, for about 5 years, I lived in Southern California, and back, it was in the early 90s. And I wrote a book about migrant workers there. And we tried to shop it to a bunch of publishers, including Scribner, who rejected it. But the agent was really nice, and I remembered her, and I called her agency, and she doesn't do, it's Nicole Araji. She doesn't do nonfiction, but she has somebody else in her agency that does nonfiction, Frances Cody, who's phenomenal. And yeah, we just set the ball rolling, and then I stayed on for a little bit, and then I went full time book mode, which was really fun to do. But I don't. The question was the sequel. It's a lot of work for a little, not a lot of money. If you factor in how much you get, if you take the advance, and um, it just
Yeah.
doesn't. It's believe me, it's about $1 an hour for the amount of work you put in. But I'm really happy with the book, so whatever.
Could be. It's a great book. And anybody who has a concern about what has happened with the opioid crisis needs to read it. It's truly um, mind blowing. Of course, even though we here in Cabell County and in Huntington lived through that, I don't think we really saw the impact and knew those numbers until your investigative reporting showed them up. So thank you for doing that. Speaking of the book that you wrote about teaching migrant workers, would you ever consider reviving that for publication?
Oh, I haven't. It's in a box in the attic, and I've been too nervous to look at it. Um, there's a lot of work. I mean, I guess it could be revived, but it was a long time ago. One thing I learned though is I made the mistake because I was in my 20s when I wrote that, and the agent said you got to change this and you got to change that and you got to change look for this narrative arc. And I said I actually moved from California, and by the time I was working at a small newspaper in Pennsylvania, so I just was like, I wrote back something like, I don't think I need to do that. Well, that's why it's in my attic. But that was a lesson learned, because this time, when the editor came back, publisher Scribner, Kathy Belden, who's won multiple national book awards, helped writers who've won national book awards multiple times. She had a lot of changes she wanted, and I think her uh, total, it was about 75 pages of analysis and changes she wanted in single space. So I had to, I mean, but she read it thoroughly, and she was right just about everything, and I did what she told. I just used it like a checklist, every day I said I'm going to do one chapter and go through everything she said and make all the changes and make it, connect we're so used to as reporters just doing like, one story a day, one story a day, one story a day, but there's no like, narrative. There's no up and down, and you have the backstory and all that. And so this time, from learning from my mistakes of the past, just buckled down and spent a good 3 months or so revising. And I guess that's probably the most under thing that people that get into authoring books. And I actually I paid another guy to sort of edit and copy edit it before I even gave it to Scribner. So
Yeah, a good editor
um,
is invaluable. There's no question.
yeah, it really is, and she really cared about the book, and she's just been dynamite.
Yeah. Can you give us a real quick rundown on what Mountain State Spotlight is about?
Yeah, it's the first nonprofit newsroom in the state. We're online only, primarily focusing on investigative reporting. Um, it's a real experiment. There's other online news organizations in other states, but this is the first in West Virginia, and it's funded through a nonprofit called American Journalism Project, which is, they're trying to. You've probably heard about news deserts and the decline of local news, and this is a way to try to counteract that, because the model for most newspapers is not working. The advertising has gone down so much, the retail advertising and the classified advertising, that it's hard to support a paper. So we're 100% supported by readers. They donate, $5 here, $5 there. ProPublica, which is the biggest online news organization in the country, they're partnering with us, and it's so far so good. I mean, it's been hard to start a new project amid the pandemic, but um, we've got some incredibly talented young reporters who I failed to mention. There's another program called Report for America, which is like Teach for America. It places emerging, instead of teachers, it replaces places emerging reporters, and pay a, we pay about a third, and they pay about a third, and then the community pays about a third for their salaries. And they're just so full of energy. I mean, it's unbelievable what they do.
Well,
And
we
we've been able to bring back, I mean, one nice thing is we've actually been able to bring back people who moved away from West Virginia because they couldn't find a job in the media. And we've hired them and they've come back to West Virginia and they're, happy to be closer to their families.
Right, that's great. Thank you so much for being with us today, Eric. We really appreciate it. Your book, I assume, is available through bookshop.org.
Yeah,
It's on at Taylor Books in Charleston,
yeah.
places in Huntington, and I hope people will take an opportunity to pick it up. That's Death in Mud Lick. And we thank you so much. We hope to return to live interviews sometime soon, but in the meantime, we'll see you again on Zoom. Thanks so much for being with us and have a good day.
Connect with Chapters through email. Write to lp4@zoominternet.net. Chapters has a Facebook page at Armstrong Chapters. Like, subscribe, share, and comment. All Chapters episodes are available on YouTube. Visit the Armstrong Neighborhood channel on YouTube and look for a playlist of all the Chapters programs.